So what angle has a sine value of 1/2? That's your first question. And then you're going to take the cosine of that angle. So numbers 1 and 2 are like 2 questions in one. Number 3 is just a straightforward question. It's just asking for the inverse. It's not a composite question. So take a guess. Don't leave anything blank. That's how you can make sure you're ready for your next test, which is next Friday. Not this Friday, but next Friday. It'll be here before you know it. You'll have another blank unit circle to fill in to use on that test. And then compare your answers with somebody close to you to see if you're getting the right answers. You can help each other. Okay, so what angle, so remember for sine, when we're talking about the inverse, we're only looking in quadrants 1 and 4. So what angle in quadrants 1 or 4 has a sine value of positive 1/2? So what is that angle? And if it's positive, we know it has to be quadrant 1, not quadrant 4. So what's the angle that has a sine value of 1/2? Pi over 6. Does everybody see that? So the answer to this question that I have boxed in yellow is pi over 6. So we answered the first questions, because when you have a composite, it's like it's just 2 questions in one. So I figured out that the cosine, so now that I know that that's the answer to this question, I need to take the cosine, because that's the second question, of that angle. So the angle is pi over 6. And what is the cosine of pi over 6? Square root of 3 over 2. Who had that for number 1? If you had that for number 1, you're where you need to be. I'm going to write that off to the side. That's a little too thick. Let's write it right here. So that is the final answer to number 1. Number 2, again, it's a composite. Start off by answering this question. So the first question is not an inverse question. So we're not restricted to a certain domain or a certain quadrant. It's find 4 pi over 3 and tell me the cosine of that angle. So find 4 pi over 3 on your unit circle. And the cosine of 4 pi over 3 is what? Emma, what's the cosine of 4 pi over 3? So negative 1 over 2, that would go right here. So now we need to find the cosecant. What angle has a cosecant of negative 1/2? Is that even an option on our unit circle? Because who is the sister to cosecant? Sine. So in order for us to have a cosecant of negative 1/2, we would need to have a sine of negative 2. So we don't have that. So what do you think our answer is to number 2? Yep, it's undefined. It does not exist. Now, if that said sine, then we could keep going, but it's not. That's not what it's asking us for. And then the last one is just using what angle and what quadrants am I looking in for number 3? It's a cotangent. So what quadrants do we look in for cotangent? 1 and 2, and it's an easy one because it's negative 1. Okay, so we should know that it's in quadrant 2, and our angle is 3 pi over 4. Okay, any questions about our warm-up? So we're going to finish out just practicing finding our composites today. And then tomorrow we're going to start 7-3, which is solving equations using, again, only using a unit circle for our equations. All right, take a second and copy down our next examples. These are all inverses, so you have to know what quadrant we're looking in for each one. So take a minute, copy it down, and then we'll go through them together. Okay, so cosecant -1. So in order for cosecant to be -1, that means that the sign is also -1, because the reciprocal of -1 is -1. So if you take 1 and flip it, you get the same answer. So what angle do you think we're looking for? What angle in quadrants 1 or 4 has a sign value of -1? So right here, sine is -1. Do you see that right there? Okay, so the angle would be 3 pi over 2. So that's the answer to our first question. Okay, what angle is tangent undefined? So tangent is equal to sine divided by cosine. So whenever cosine is 0, tangent is going to be undefined. And that actually happens 2 places. It happens here at pi over 2. Oh, wait a minute. I just did something definitely wrong. Let me pause. The answer is not 3 pi over 2. What should it be? Negative pi over 2. Thank you. Because remember, our answers have to fall between -90 and +90. So 3 pi over 2 would not be right. Okay, so now that we got that fixed, because that's important. Now let's look at the second question. So it would be 2 places. The first place is positive pi over 2, and the second place is negative pi over 2. So negative pi over 2 and positive pi over 2 are the answers to number 2, to our second question. All right, what angle in quadrants 1 or 2 has a cosine value of +4? Do we have cosine of +4? We do not. That's D and E. Undefined. So the range for cosine is -1 to 1, so we can't go below or above that. If you take the square root of 2, that's actually, again, that's not on our unit circle. We have the square root of 2 over 2, but the square root of 2 is like 1 point something. It's outside of our it's outside of our range. So this is also undefined. This does not exist. Secant is the sister to cosine. So the reciprocal of -2 root 3 over 3 is -√3 over 2. That's what it's asking you for. What angle has a cosine value in quadrants 1 or 2 of -√3 over 2? 5 pi over 6. So it's right here. So our answer is 5 pi over 6. And then lastly, cotangent, which is also in quadrants 1 and 2. Cotangent is equal to cosine over sine. So you have to do a little bit of thinking for our tangents and cotangents if it's not 1 or -1. So for cotangent, we know that we're looking in quadrants 1 or 2 for inverse cotangent. So I'm not looking down here. And because it's negative, I know I'm not in quadrant 1. So my angle is somewhere in here. It's one of these 3. Now we can automatically cross out this one though, because that one isn't, that's -1. So we know it's not that. So now we have a 50-50 chance. It's either 5 pi over 6 or 2 pi over 3. And you need to divide to figure out which one it is. So if you take a moment to divide to find the cotangent of 2 pi over 3, that is going to equal cosine, which is -1/2, divided by sine. And when you do your keep change flip that you learned way back in middle school, you should get this answer, which is why I know the answer, the angle is 2 pi over 3. So let's go ahead and finish that out. So -1/2, excuse me, keep change flip. So my 2's cancel out. So I have -1 over √3. And then after you rationalize that by multiplying by the square root of 3, then we get that -√3 over 3. So that's why I know the answer is 2 pi over 3. So these are our last 4 questions, and these again, these are composites. So that means anytime it's a composite, you're just answering 2 questions. So there's 2 questions that you're answering. So take a couple minutes to copy these 4 questions down, and then try to answer the 4 questions, and then we'll go through it together. Okay, so the first question is, what is the cosine value of -pi over 6? So the cosine of -pi over 6 on the unit circle, that's the same as 11 pi over 6. So the cosine is the square root of 3 over 2. So now we need to find the inverse cosine of negative square root of 3 over 2. No, it's positive, sorry. Okay, so let's start over here. So first we got to find the cosine of -pi over 6. -pi over 6 is the same as 11 pi over 6. We got that part right. We good. Cosine is x. We got that. So we have the square root of 3 over 2. So now we answered this question. Now we need to answer the second question, which is, what is the inverse cosine of positive square root of 3 over 2? Now, what quadrants am I looking in for inverse cosine? Because notice how this angle was in quadrant 4. So that's why I can't keep -pi over 6. That's not my answer. So I need an answer in quadrants 1 or 2. So what is going to be my final answer? Positive pi over 6. All right, let's look at the second one here. First, we're going to find the sine of pi over 4. So sine of pi over 4 is square root of 2 over 2. And now the second question is, looking in quadrants 1 or 4, what angle has that sine value? So I know that it is still going to be pi over 4 because the original angle was within quadrants 1 or 4 to begin with. So that's how I know my final answer is still going to be pi over 4. So for example, you see how we have the same, we have the inverse cosine of a cosine. If this angle was in quadrants 1 or 2, because that's where I have to be for inverse cosine, then that would just be my answer. But this is not in quadrants 1 or 2. Okay, so let's go ahead and find the cosine of this angle. So that's our first question. What is the cosine of 11 pi over 6. So the cosine of 11 pi over 6 is positive square root of 3 over 2. So these are essentially the same question. So my final answer is, again, pi over 6. So the tangent of 3 pi over 2 is undefined because that's sine divided by cosine. So this is asking me where on the unit circle, well, not on the entire unit circle, but within my restriction, where is the tangent undefined? And we had this on our last slide. So our answers would be negative pi over 2 and positive pi over 2. Okay, so again, just a reminder that homework 6 is due tomorrow. And then tomorrow we're going to actually start solving equations.